Yay, we're flying around Hogwarts and whoa. As you might know if you have watched my other videos, Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets has 5 different game adaptations based on the movie. Today we're looking at the PlayStation 2, Gamecube and Xbox versions. You might be wondering why I'm covering those before tackling Philosopher's Stone for the same platforms. Well, the game based on that movie was released in 2003, a year after this one. But what's more curious is that the Chamber of Secrets actually started out as a Philosopher's Stone game, but mid-production was changed to be a tie-in for the second Harry Potter movie. The assets that were done and cut for that first version though would be reused in the future Philosopher's Stone release. Another weird thing about the version of the game we're looking at today is that technically all the platforms it's released on have the same game, but also not really. This is because they were developed by 2 different studios, EA UK for PlayStation 2 and Eurocom for Xbox and Gamecube, based on the same set of designs. There was no main version that would be then ported to all systems, it was a matter of parallel development. As a result, we have 2 games that are sort of the same because they share the same core, but also there's quite a lot of differences. And I'm not talking about things you would often see in these multi-platform releases, like one version having some extra mini-games and another a small bonus area or something. Though this is also the case here, with GameCube having a bonus room that is unlocked by connecting the console to the GBA version of Chamber of Secrets. There are a lot of differences that outright change how some areas are played. But at the same time, all the differences are not extensive enough for us to consider the EA UK and Eurocom versions to be different games, each deserving their own video. It's weird. I have played both games to completion trying to figure out which one I should choose as the definitive version to dissect. And I can't. Because outside of the graphical aspect where the GameCube Xbox version is the clear winner, both have their own pros and cons. Choosing what version is better would really be a matter of personal preferences more than anything. Which is why in this video I'm gonna do something I haven't done before. I will essentially dissect both versions in the same video, and then it will be up to you to decide which game you would prefer more. And as always, we'll do this breakdown with the help of my Stasocritic system. My name is Stanislav, I am a game designer, and this is my review of Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets for PlayStation 2, Xbox and Gamecube. And we start with the design category. This is the most important category of Stasocritic, as it's all about how well the game is played and structured, which is why it's got the biggest weight, 4. From the get-go, what makes the Chamber of Secrets interesting from an adaptational point of view is that it didn't try to create a standard platformer with the Harry Potter skin on it, but rather tried to incorporate the structure of the Harry Potter stories, the earlier ones especially, into its design. As such, the game is divided into a series of day and night sections. During the day, you are completing activities related to studying, lessons that will unlock new spells, as well as Quidditch matches. While at night you sneak around and go into different forbidden areas to solve the central mystery, in some cases learning some new spells on the way too. The exception to this structure is the beginning tutorial that appropriately enough takes place in the Burrow and Diagon Alley, serving as a preparation for the upcoming year at Hogwarts. This creates a very solid foundation for the experience, and it's one of the few Harry Potter titles where the license can actually be considered a proper design pillar, not just a thematic one. The second gameplay pillar is naturally focused on spellcasting. The more spells you learn, the more things you're able to achieve. And the last one would be exploration, though here we'll have to eventually discuss the differences between the clear intent of the game and if it has actually achieved it. But regardless, this is the core foundation that the PlayStation 2 and GameCube Xbox versions share. So how do they differ? Well, it would make sense to start with the core gameplay. First things first, if that matters to you, the version for PlayStation 2 plays at 30 FPS, while the other one, at least the GameCube version which I have recorded, has a very stable performance of 60 FPS. Both games have standard third-person view where you control the character with the left stick, but only the GameCube Xbox version has an actual 360-degree camera rotation, while in the PlayStation 2 version you can only pan around the currently available view. This makes the simple act of navigation somewhat more cumbersome in the PlayStation 2 version, and that is worsened by the fact that the automatic targeting of your spells isn't as consistent there as well. If in the version on Gamecube and Xbox you can cast spells without a lock-on fairly easily, in the PlayStation 2 game you will often miss should you not use the lock-on. However, even though you might think that this makes the Gamecube version a clear winner in the core gameplay department, it has one very big annoyance. Whenever you're hit, a bunch of beans fall out of you, and there is a very limited time to collect them all before they disappear. And this actively discourages searching for every flavored beans that act as the main shop currency in this game. In the version for Gamecube and Xbox, it is preferable to collect beans only while you're in safe Hogwarts spaces between missions, which obviously is far from ideal. On PlayStation 2, there is no such problem. The only enemies that take beans out of you are ghosts, and their attack can either be avoided or countered with a Lumos spell. A counter that, by the way, doesn't work in the version for Gamecube and Xbox for some reason. So even though the PlayStation 2 game can often feel clunkier to play, it is also less frustrating. Except when we're talking about boss battles. For some reason, in the PlayStation 2 version, the bosses have pretty high amounts of health. In the version for Gamecube Xbox, it takes about 3-4 hits to defeat them, which is enough for the fights to not get too boring, while in the PlayStation 2 version, bosses take far more hits. And considering that 5 out of 9 bosses in this game are these huge gargoyles with which you play an Expelliarmus tennis match, it can get rather repetitive. 3 of these gargoyles you will encounter within the same dungeon. But even the more developed boss battles don't have enough stages and variety in them to warrant big health bars. Now, the stealth segments are done better in the PS2 version. Mind you, they're not great, as is par for the course for these action-adventure games that don't focus on stealth, but for some reason have it anyway. But the PlayStation 2 version has better camera angles that let you see more of the environment, the distraction tools are more consistent. For example, the noise balloons in the Gamecube Xbox version fly away in a random direction for a while before activating, while in the PS2 game they stay pretty much on the same spot you've put them on. But most importantly, in the PlayStation 2 version you can use Expelliarmus to deflect the binding spell that prefects cast when you're detected, which is not possible in the version for Gamecube and Xbox. And yet, and this is where we get to some other curious differences, in the Gamecube and Xbox versions, the only areas where prefects roam are near the library and Slytherin dungeons, and there is less of them in each room. While in the PlayStation 2 version, you will have prefects not only in those locations, but also on the 7th floor, the entrance hall, and the Hogwarts grounds themselves. So in terms of stealth, the situation is exactly the opposite of the core gameplay one. Stealth plays better on PlayStation 2, but on Gamecube and Xbox it is actually less frustrating because there's less of it and less prefects to worry about. It is actually fairly reasonable to try and just run by. Flying on a broom works the same in both versions, but in the PlayStation 2 game Harry keeps trying to weirdly reposition after you stop moving him, which makes activities like races feel very erratic because the camera just keeps shaking all the time. The version for Gamecube and Xbox is much smoother in this regard, and also Harry's collision is much more precise, so if you decide to enter a tunnel, you will not be thrown around all over the place either. But yeah, this is the gameplay of Chamber of Secrets in a nutshell. All jumps are automatic and I've never really experienced an issue with them, wall sneaking works fine, sometimes you have to call Hedwig to your aid, but really, the core gameplay is focused mostly on casting appropriate spells at appropriate objects. 3 out of 4 face buttons are responsible for casting whichever spell you assign to them, or item, though those will be used much less. It is a pity then that despite this version of Chamber of Secrets not having the same restrictions as the PC one, and if you don't know, I will quickly mention that in the PC version you can't select spells and just cast whatever is assigned to an object, the console game, and this applies to all versions discussed here, barely ever asks you to combine any of the spells. In the entire game, there is literally only a single location where you have to use 2 spells on the same object. Incendio to start a fire and then Flipendo to push it. And there's only a single enemy type that needs 2 spells to defeat it. Fire Crab, which uses the exact opposite combination, Flipendo to disable it and Incendio to defeat it. The rest of the game is entirely about using specific spells on specific objects. Sea green slime? Well, that's for Scourge. A carpet? Defendo it. Now, of course, the PC version tried to solve its conundrum through elaborate level design, but this aspect in the Chamber of Secrets console version is quite basic. The foundation is sound. The game is divided into small linear levels connected by the central Hogwarts hub. The levels for the most part try to have a dungeon-like structure where you go from room to room, each having one or more challenges within them, related to jumping, obstacle avoidance, combat, or using spells to solve a little puzzle. Now, there are several reasons why these levels manage to feel basic. First, of course, is the aspect of every obstacle being related to usage of a single particular spell, but this wouldn't have been as noticeable if you'd have to often use your constantly increasing array of spells. Only the spell distribution is very uneven. For example, Defendo is used in the segment where you have to learn it, the Expelliarmus spell challenge, and when you go through the library restricted section. You won't have to use Defendo in any other separate level after that. Aviforce is mostly used in the Aviforce spell challenge itself. You also have to use it a couple times in the Incendio challenge, but after that it's not used in levels. Even at the end, the titular Chamber of Secrets is a perfect opportunity to create a gauntlet that utilizes everything you have learned throughout the game. But in this game proper, it exists only for a boss battle with a giant snake, where you don't even have to use a single spell you've learned, you're given the Sword of Gryffindor instead. Then, many of these levels lack any secrets to find. They're fairly linear, where you just have to move from one room to the next without any optional places to discover. That is combined with a relatively small size. Most levels are about 4 or 5 chambers or areas each. A couple are even smaller, though there are a few that are bigger. All this taken together creates the feeling of levels being pretty simplistic. They do work, as the challenges you complete are varied and most of the time different, but also there is not enough depth to them. To be fair, PlayStation 2 does add some additional secret spaces. Like for example, in the very first tutorial level, you can actually climb onto the second floor of the barn there to find a wizard card, which you can't do in the Gamecube Xbox version. But there's only a couple additions like that, and it's not enough. Among other differences between the PlayStation 2 version and Gamecube Xbox level design, we have different enemy composition. Some areas on PS2 would feature imps, while the same locations in the other versions have fire crabs, for example. Then there are little dungeon differences there and there. One spell challenge has a section where you have to drop spiked balls into holes, and in the PlayStation 2 version you have to push buttons so that spikes first would drop down on ropes, while on Gamecube Xbox all spiked balls are already down and you just have to cut them. This makes the PlayStation 2 version more engaging there, but on the other hand the section that follows is better in the version for Gamecube and Xbox. There, the fire bellows don't keep turning to target you, which makes it a more sensible challenge to complete. But at the end of the day, neither of these differences change the fact that in both versions, the same spell challenge is essentially a small collection of 4 rooms. It's not bad and feels nice to play, sure, but still not entirely fulfilling. If we switch our attention from levels to the Hogwarts hub, sadly, despite the whole purpose of this hub being exploration, that aspect still lacks depth. There are some secret shortcuts between floors that you can find, with some additional secret rooms within them that house some chests, but again, that's really not enough. Most of your exploration within the castle will consist of checking different classrooms for chests that contain wizard cards. The ironic part is that in this paradigm, your spells don't actually give you access to more parts of the castle. You have pretty much most of the access you need from the get-go, and the spells matter only for opening the actual chests. So if you don't have Incendio, you can't open chests that have webs all over it, for example. But you still can enter all these rooms, so access to different parts of the castle doesn't depend on what spells you have. There are a couple locations that are actually blocked by obstacles that need a particular spell to open them, but again what they usually house is just a small room with a chest. Basically, during Hogwarts exploration, you won't really find anything that utilizes all the core gameplay possibilities. It's just a matter of being able to open chests in areas that you already can visit. Aviforce is already lacking use in linear levels, but outside of them it is used only once to open a door, and that's because it's the only spell that doesn't open chests. Well, Flipendo also doesn't open chests, but at least you can use it to get beans out of objects around the castle. All this is a big missed opportunity, and it's understandable that normal floors and classrooms shouldn't be transformed into platforming challenges, but you could still have a bunch of secret areas that would have been, it's just there aren't any. This is when it comes to the castle interiors. When it comes to the Hogwarts grounds, we get to the biggest difference between the PlayStation 2 and GameCube Xbox versions. In the PlayStation 2 version, you can walk everywhere on the grounds, and when you fly with your broom, you can land anywhere you want. In the GameCube Xbox version, you can't do that. There are Hogwarts grounds, of course, but what happens is there are a bunch of fast travel points that get you from one location to another. And when you fly, you can land only in these specific locations. You would think that the amount of freedom would make the PlayStation 2 version a definitive winner in this regard. And it certainly does in terms of atmosphere. It feels liberating to be able to fly and land anywhere, not to mention technically impressive for PS2. But in terms of actual engagement, it's quite questionable, because once you start exploring, you realize that the grounds are painstakingly empty, devoid of life and of actual things to do. Sure, you will see some students passing by in a couple areas, but most are lacking them. There are some places with secret wizard cards, like a broken window or torches that you have to light up with incendio. But once again, and I'm saying this quite a lot in this video, there is not nearly enough secrets or spells that you have to use, especially for the amount of space that we have. Most of it feels dead. The game tries to liven things up with side missions, most of them being fetch quests. There are two types of these fetch quests in the game. One type is present in all versions. The notice board will list lost objects with some hints where they could be found, and you have to bring them back to receive a wizard card, after which the next quest will appear. The other type is present only in the PlayStation 2 version, and that's student side quests on the grounds, who will also ask you to bring their lost objects. No, the difference is that most of the time they actually won't give you any hints where these objects could be, so you just have to walk or fly around and see if you can find something sparkly. And roaming aimlessly around in hopes to find something is not that interesting of an activity. So I would say that the GameCube Xbox version actually wins by not having these missions. Oh, and one more thing, the objects that these PlayStation 2 students ask you to find, they won't appear until you talk to them twice to make sure the side quest is accepted, which is not how the notice board quests work. You don't have to specifically accept those. I didn't notice that at first and have spent a lot of time searching for an item that's not there. The other two types of activities that you can do on Hogwarts grounds are gnome tossing and racing minigames, both of which reward you with wizard cards. They're actually quite fun activities, with the caveat that the flying camera in PlayStation 2 version really doesn't help. But even though races, like Quidditch actually, ultimately revolve around you flying through rings to speed yourself up to reach the goal before your opponent, be it a race and finish line or the snitch, these rings are usually placed in such a way that you would have to fly around towers or under bridges and have some pretty considerable speed-up stretches, so these activities are still fun. And if in the PlayStation 2 version you have to find every student to challenge yourself, in the version for GameCube Xbox there is Neville standing outside the castle entrance with a list of all available activities that teleports you to the students in question. Now, again, the PlayStation 2 version is definitely more atmospheric, but considering that there is only 5 students who want to race and 5 students who want to participate in gnome tossing, searching for them on all those rooftops can become quite boring after a while. On the other hand, in the GameCube Xbox version there is no reason to fly around Hogwarts, except to go through randomly appearing rings in an area to collect some beans, which is not a thing in the PlayStation 2 version. So I can't say that one version is definitely better than the other in this regard. Both have their pros and cons. But one thing is clear, neither managed to make the open-world Hogwarts castle truly engaging to explore. It's fine, but definitely doesn't meet its true potential. So in the end, what brings the most engagement to this iteration of Chamber of Secrets is not the levels that are fine but small and linear, nor the exploration aspect, which doesn't take advantage of the character progression, nor does it provide any particularly interesting secrets to discover, but its structure. Visiting Diagon Alley before getting to Hogwarts, going around all these shops to get school supplies, having this whole day-night structure after you start studying, that's what keeps you in the zone. It helps that this is one of the few Harry Potter games where you can actually lose both the Quidditch Cup and the House Cup, which makes it feel like your actions have more agency. Plus, Chamber of Secrets never puts you in a situation where you can't collect all wizard cards. Every 10 cards give you extra health, and you get a special one for collecting all cards. No special secret areas or challenges though. But on the bright side, if you have missed a card in one of the linear levels, the Weasley Brothers shop will always sell those, so you're never blocked from completing your collection. That said, filling up said collection can feel quite repetitive. Going around classrooms to open chests gets old after a while. Likewise, flying around Hogwarts in the PlayStation 2 version to see which torches have to be lit, as that's what you have to do most often to get a wizard card on the grounds. This is why, should you open up all the scores for design, I will assign a 6. And this applies to both versions of the game. The PlayStation 2 and Gamecube Xbox version both have their strengths and weaknesses, but they all share the same fate of having a strong foundation that is ultimately underdeveloped and quite basic in its final implementation. Now, let's discuss context. This category has a weight of 1 as it's about things that enhance the experience rather than define it. Plot, character arcs, motivation, etc. Now, even though this game is based on a movie, we'll dissect how well it handles this aspect without assumed knowledge of the source material. Though of course, since this is a sequel, we will not penalize the game for assuming knowledge of the previous part, especially considering that at this point these platforms didn't have a Philosopher's Stone game. Now, even here, the different versions of Chamber of Secrets have their own pros and cons. The GameCube Xbox version has more story cutscenes, and many of those that are shared with the PlayStation 2 version tend to have more details to them. For example, this is how you leave Diagon Alley in the PS2 version.
Ready to go to Hogwarts, Harry?
And this is how you leave Diagon Alley in the GameCube Xbox version.
Ready to go to Hogwarts, Harry?
You know, Ron, I'm really not sure about this.
We've got to get to school, haven't we? And even underage wizards are allowed to use magic if it's a real emergency. Section 19 or something of the restriction thingy.
You're sure you can fly it okay?
What's it look like? I'm doing alright, aren't I?
Yeah, I suppose. So far.
When you go to sneak into the library the first night, the GameCube Xbox version has one more conversation with Nick the Ghost, which is not present in the PlayStation 2 one. Harry hears the voice of the Basilisk, which in the PS2 version he doesn't do until he has to go into Dumbledore's office, and while in both versions that scene happens earlier than it should, Dumbledore's question makes a bit more sense in the GameCube Xbox version due to already hearing the voice before than it does in the PS2 one. Even some important cutscenes are outright missing in the PlayStation 2 version, which affects the flow and knowledge of important information. For example, this is what happens in the PlayStation 2 game after Ron saves you from the spiders. And this is what we get in the GameCube Xbox version.
Follow the spiders. What was Hagrid thinking? You're lucky to be alive.
We now know that Hagrid never opened the Chamber of Secrets. He was innocent. Wait a minute, something Aragog said. Ron, that girl who died. Aragog said she was found in a bathroom. What if she never left the bathroom? What if she's still there?
You don't think... Not Moaning Myrtle?
It would make a lot of sense if it was.
Oh! In all the excitement I forgot. Someone's been up to the dormitory and taken the diary.
What?
I went to look for Hermione, but I couldn't find her. When I got back to the dormitory, the diary was missing.
What?
Afraid so.
But only a Gryffindor could have stolen it. Nobody else knows our password.
Exactly. Anyway, I'm off to bed. See you, Harry.
See you, Ron, and thanks for rescuing me.
You're my best friend. It's my job.
But the PlayStation 2 version has many more conversations with different characters in the world than the GameCube Xbox one. For example, after learning that Harry can talk to snakes, in the PS2 version you will see students discussing that fact, which adds to the feeling of becoming estranged from them. It's not absent from the GameCube Xbox version since it has a story cutscene to focus on this aspect, but there is something special in having to hear students discuss you in the background, in the world itself. You also have more world interactions with Ginny and see her more often in the PS2 version, acting appropriately weirdly, than you do in the other one. Then, for example, when you find an item from the notice board, in the PlayStation 2 version there will be an actual student thanking you and giving a wizard card, while in the GameCube version you will just suddenly receive one. So the GameCube version wins in its delivery of the main story, but the PS2 version wins in creating a world that reacts to your actions. Ultimately though, the situation with context is very similar to the one with design. Every version has its pros and cons, yes, but they're all built on the same foundation, which means the same overall strengths and weaknesses. For what it's worth, this version of Chamber of Secrets makes some smart choices from the point of view of adapting the source material's story to a game. For example, Dobby is entirely cut. Now, in the context of the whole series that the developers didn't have since at the time only 4 books were released, this is not the best choice. But if we take what developers knew at the time, it is a smart decision since you don't have to worry about fitting Dobby into the confines of the game. The students learn about the history behind the Chamber of Secrets not from a teacher in class, but from a history book which Harry needs to get from the restricted section of a library, transforming exposition into a reward for completing a level. Even the fact that you go alone to the Forbidden Forest is justified by Ron searching for Hermione at the time, so he simply didn't have the chance to eavesdrop on the conversation with Hagrid together with Harry, and didn't leave Harry to go to the forest alone just because. And speaking of the conversation with Hagrid, in the PC version for example, it is not clear why he is given the hint about the spiders, since he didn't know Harry is there. However, in this version, even though Harry didn't have time to talk to Hagrid, the cutscene is set up in such a way that Hagrid clearly sees Harry in hiding, so he says his hint. Sadly, even though Chamber of Secrets make all these good choices for adaptation purposes, it also misses the mark plenty of times. First, the general flow of the story is weird, sort of backwards even. For example, as I've mentioned before, we learn about the Chamber of Secrets from a history book, and therefore what Slytherin wanted his heir to do. And yet, the duel with Malfoy, where everybody gets scared of Harry because he can talk to snakes, which is what Salazar Slytherin was known for, happens before we learn that history. So people are afraid that Salazar could be Harry's ancestor, but we don't know yet why that matters so much. And the scene in Dumbledore's office where Harry wonders if he was sorted into the right house happens before all that, after the very first attack when Headless Sneak gets petrified. Speaking of attacks, only 2 people get petrified in the entire game, Headless Sneak at the beginning and Hermione at the end. Most Muggleborn don't actually get affected. Then there are some character or plot points that don't go anywhere. Like for example, Lockhart is seen only 2 times in the entire game. And while the true nature of his character is hinted at in the book he wrote, which is cool, he never gets revealed as a fraud and actually is just forgotten after a first and only lesson with him. This doesn't actively hurt our understanding of the story, but also makes it feel like it is somewhat unfinished. And of course, this version also has a weird timeline in Diagon Alley, where 1 minute all students are there, and the next Harry and Ron suddenly have missed the train. Despite all these hiccups, the plot is still understandable and it is still enjoyable to experience it. A lot of it is thanks to writing, which is actually quite nice. Here are some examples so you would see what I'm talking about.
Don't worry, Ron. I'll come and get you. Just hold on.
I can't do anything else! Hurry up, Harry!
Harry, I think I've just understood something. I've got to go to the library.
What does she understand?
Loads more than I do.
But why she got to go to the library?
Because that's what Hermione does. When in doubt, go to the library.
Harry, just the person I've been looking for. Something dreadful has happened to Neville. He's got himself trapped behind a tapestry.
And I suppose you want me to get him out?
Would you? That's so kind of you, Harry.
Okay, so I've got to go into the library on the 2nd floor and get a copy of Lockhart's book, and then go out into the grounds and find my way into the herbology greenhouse to get the severing charm.
Yes.
What did he say?
Hurry up.
All this is why, if we open up all the scores for context, I will assign a 7. The story represents all important parts of the source material in a pretty understandable manner despite some flaws and weird order of events. The writing is nice, and the game makes a number of smart choices in how it has adapted the story of Chamber of Secrets into a game format. However, the issues I have mentioned and the fact that both PlayStation 2 and GameCube Xbox versions lack elements that the other one has prevents me from assigning a higher score. It's time to talk about aesthetics. This is another category with a weight of 1, as it's also about things that enhance the experience rather than define it, this time through visual style, music, sounds, etc. Both the PlayStation 2 and GameCube Xbox version visually are based on the same cartoony style, although the latter has much better implementation and it's the only area where the GameCube Xbox variant is the definitive winner. I mean, just look at the light from the stained glass in the entrance hall of Hogwarts, it's beautiful. All environments feel much more lush and vibrant than in the PS2 version, and the amount of details is insane. Look at all those portraits in the Great Stairs area, and again the light rays. Books flying around in the restricted section of the library, the leaky cauldron in Diagon Alley, hell, even just the flight stairs in your dormitory. And of course, the physics of Harry's robes that wave in a very satisfying manner while running. Just wonderful. In the GameCube Xbox version, the character models are much more detailed and have overall better body and facial animation. In the PlayStation 2 version, the characters are very static, and when talking, they can outright look creepy. Also, the cutscene cinematography in the GameCube Xbox version is much more interesting, with people actually properly interacting with one another, as opposed to simply standing and talking in the PS2 version with little amount of camera changes.
Morning, Ron. Do you know what class we've got first? I heard that it's flying.
You heard right. I'll meet you downstairs in the entrance hall.
Morning, Ron. Do you know what class we've got first? I heard that it's flying.
You heard right. I'll meet you downstairs in the entrance hall.
And even more atmospheric things like entering a spell dungeon is less impressive in the PS2 version. Also, one funny thing specific to the PlayStation 2 version is Neville. In story cutscenes and when you talk to him in the common room, he has one model. When you get side quests from him in Hogwarts grounds, he has another model. And when you return his toad for a notice board quest, that's got to be another Neville and another toad by the name of Trevor. The UI in the GameCube Xbox version is also much more slick and feels very atmospheric. That said, even the GameCube Xbox version isn't fully polished visually. The wand casting animation while target locking looks pretty weird, sometimes the characters' mouths don't open, but it mostly applies to NPCs in the open world, so that's not too noticeable. I was actually surprised by the voice acting of the main characters, especially Ron's. Usually in these licensed games the acting is okay at most, but here it's actually good?
What kept you, Harry? I can't hang around here all night, you know.
Very funny, Ron. Now how on earth am I going to release you?
Is there some kind of weak spot on the tree you could cast a spell at? Whatever you're gonna do, I suggest you do it quickly!
I'm really disappointed. With all that's happened, Professor McGonagall has cancelled this year's exams. I was really looking forward to doing all of that revision.
As you can see, Harry, Hermione's made a complete recovery.
Anyway, did you know that the House Cup is about to be awarded? The presentation's in the Great Hall.
Right. Second floor, past the library, portrait. Got it.
Well, I guess Harry's voice is the least impressive in comparison, but it's still nice. Plus, we all know that the quality of Harry's voice depends on how good he yells Flipendo.
Flipendo!
And as you can see, he does it well. Of course, we can't talk about Chamber of Secrets without mentioning its music, and we can't mention its music without a disclaimer that its composer is a horrible person, and my positive feedback about the results of his work here shouldn't stand in the way of me quite frankly condemning his atrocious actions. But that said, the music is fantastic and adds so much to the atmosphere, be it roaming around Diagon Alley, engaging in a shuffle with some imps, the final boss battle with the Basilisk, where the music is much more epic than it has any right to be.
There's nothing you can do.
Or, of course, exploring Hogwarts.
Flibbity gibbet.
The sound design is also very good. I especially like the little whispers when we select spells. The sound effect for collecting cards is short but satisfying. And even such little details like haptic feedback are done very well. The strength of the controller's vibration depends on how much you have charged the spell you cast. This is pretty subtle, but empowering. All this is why, should we open up the scores for aesthetics, I will assign a 10. Now, of course, this is based on the Gamecube Xbox version. Had I rated the PS2 version, it would have been an 8 due to the unfulfilling implementation of an overall very positive visual style, but I think it would be fair to assign a score based on the better version. There are some flaws even there, but honestly there are so many cool little details, up to Harry's hair swaying during movement, that I can't say that the issues this version has creates a feeling of it being unpolished. And considering this is a licensed movie tie-in and those are always created under strict time restrictions, all this is doubly impressive. Let's move on to Cohesion. This category has a weight of 2, and it's all about how well the game connects all of its aspects together into a singular, wholesome experience. We won't spend much time in this category today, as a lot has been discussed in the design section already. The whole game structure with the day-night distinction, the Quidditch Cup and House Cup that you can actually lose if you don't gain enough points, explorable Hogwarts, all this really puts you in the shoes of Harry Potter. Also, a detail I absolutely love is that when you have used the Polyjuice potion to disguise yourself as a Slytherin, if you get caught by prefects, then points will actually be deducted from the Slytherin house.
Goyle, breaking the rules. 5 house points from Slytherin.
Of course, up to a certain limit, so you wouldn't be able to spend a night sending Slytherin into House Cup Oblivion. Now, there are a number of weird things like Harry being the only student singled out to go into spell challenges, without even implying that other students also participate in them. Then, for example, there is a situation where we watch Lucius trying to get rid of a forbidden book, and what this book holds is the Lumos incantation, which is part of the standard curriculum. Again, this is not a big problem, but it does add a bit of gamey abstraction to the experience. Likewise, things like characters randomly deciding to go to bed after learning important information just because the game needs to switch the time of day. At one point, even Harry is frustrated by this.
Nice one, Harry. Well, all this excitement has worn me out. I think I'll head off to bed.
But Hermione, nearly Headless Nick has been attacked and I'll tell you in the morning.
All this is why I will assign an 8 to Cohesion. Chamber of Secrets might have some weird aspects, but it is still a solid representation of a Harry Potter experience in game form. Time for our final category, emotions. This is the most subjective category of Stasocritic, but it has the second biggest weight, 3. We discuss purely personal feelings here, but at the end of the day, these feelings matter a lot. At the beginning of the video, I said I couldn't quite decide which version of the game to dissect as the definitive one. There are 2 reasons for that. As mentioned, both have their pros and cons, with the exception of aesthetics, which, given the differences in design and context, is not a good arbiter for selecting a definitive version. But also as a whole, I enjoyed both versions the same. These may not be the most deep games out there, but they're of a solid quality and are very enjoyable. I have had great joy in going through each, which is why, out of all scores for emotions, I will assign a 9. It should be noted that I didn't 100% any of the versions, because due to reasons mentioned in the design section, the collection of wizard cards becomes very repetitive, but when it comes to the overall experience, I really liked both versions of this game. Let's summarize everything. After all scores and their weights are taken into account, Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets for home consoles gets a final Stasocritic rating of 74. I suppose for the purposes of fairness, I should mention that the PlayStation 2 version would score 72 due to differences in aesthetics quality. But regardless, this is a good game. I would even say that alongside the PC version of Chamber, it is sort of a forgotten classic that deserves to be remembered more. Even when people reminisce about good licensed tie-ins of those days, I've noticed that Chamber of Secrets often manages to avoid attention. But despite its flaws, Chamber of Secrets is a solid representative of its genre that I would readily recommend not just to Harry Potter fans, but to all players interested in such types of games. It's, quite honestly, good.